Hey, happy Tuesday, everybody. This is AL.com recruiting brought to you by Southern Orthopedic Surgeons here for the Athlete in You. Special day today, recapping the Iron Bowl and talking about the Super 7. That's why we're doing this a day early. We look a little different here. You will notice my co host Simone Eli is not here. She's on maternity leave. Praying for Simone and Coach Sessions and a healthy baby boy later this week. But she'll be back hopefully in the new year. And in the meantime, we have a very prepared, very astute guest, Randy Kennedy, my buddy from Sports Talk 99.5 in Mobile. How you doing, Randy?
Doing great. I'm not sure I offer what Simone offers, but we'll try to get through it.
We'll muddle through. But Randy and I'll be with you, for the next couple of weeks anyway, as we lead up to early signing day. But glad to be with you today. We're going to be talking a lot about the Super 7 and the Auburn and Alabama commitments and prospects that are involved in that. But Randy, wanted to start off with some big news happening this week. Early on, let's start off talking about Mike Bobo out as Auburn's offensive coordinator, the first of 3 year a 3-year deal. He only serves 1 year deal. Where do you think this is as far as recruiting goes for Auburn?
Well, I think it's a big storyline. I mean, to start with the fact that Mike Bobo's son, Drew Bobo, is committed to Auburn as an offensive lineman out of Auburn High School. That's the most obvious connection. The second part of this is that Mike Bobo is a very popular figure on the recruiting trail. You know this being among high school coaches in Alabama, specifically in Georgia, where he's from. Very popular guy. So I think it's a big deal as we get closer to signing day, just a couple of weeks away. All these moves at Auburn and other places being made this close to signing day. Obviously, it's a big deal, but this is how the calendar has been convinced. I do think that Auburn's quarterback commit from the state of Georgia is still very solid with Auburn. He has said so since Mike Bobo was let go. So I think Auburn is set there, but I think it's going to have an effect on a lot of guys where Mike Bobo was either the lead recruiter or certainly one of the key recruiters for Auburn.
Yeah, you mentioned Holden Garner. That's the quarterback commit from Savannah, Georgia. He tweeted out that he's still locked in. Damari Alston, who's their running back commit, also says he's locked in. We'll see if that holds true. I talked to Keith Etheridge, the Auburn high school coach, earlier this week about the Mike Bobo news. Obviously, he coached his son, Drew, and Drew has said when he committed that, look, I'm not going somewhere because my dad's there. I want to go where I want to go. He's always taught me that. But I think probably unrealistic, Randy, to assume that Drew's going to be an Auburn commitment after this, right?
You would think so. I mean, if he ends up at Auburn, that's going to be an interesting take. I said at the time when Drew Bobo committed to Auburn, I said, this is a big deal. One, because Drew Bobo is a good player. And two, because it kind of indicates that Mike Bobo thinks things are going well at Auburn. Or otherwise, he would tell his son, hey, maybe this is not the greatest place for you to come, even though I'm employed here. So I think this obviously is a turn from that and something that Mike Bobo didn't see at that time, which you remember Auburn was 6-2 at one point earlier this year. Things were going well, obviously not so much down the stretch with a 4-game losing streak, but I'd be surprised if Drew Bobo ended up at Auburn. We'll see what his options are. I mean, at one point, Georgia was recruiting him. That was one of the main factors for Drew Bobo, but boy, it's a really high bar to get in that Georgia class the way the Bulldogs are recruiting.
Yeah, and of course, not only Auburn has commitments from Powell Gordon as well at Auburn High School and Eston Harris. Coach Etheridge told me that he had talked to EJ since that news, and Will Friend is a big recruiter on that deal. The offensive line coach, former Alabama player who's been multiple stops. They, what Coach Etheridge seemed to think is as long as Will Friend's there, at least Eston and maybe some of those other frontline guys will stick to it. You see it that way, Randy?
I do, and Will Friend, very well-respected guy as an offensive line coach and as a recruiter, so not surprised to hear that.
What about, Randy, we're just seeing now as we record this show, at least three Auburn guys that I know of, including Sean Shivers, Tayshawn Manning, in the transfer portal. There's rumors that could be 10 to 20 guys in the portal. What do you think this approach means as far as recruiting goes for Auburn? Are they just trying to remake this rotation, or what are they doing?
Well, I think it's a terrible development in college sports and high school recruiting. But, the way this works is if you lose 7 players from your team, you can replace those 7 guys with not counting against the 25-man limit. So, in other words, if 7 of your guys transfer out in good standing, then you can replace those 7 guys. So the unintended consequence of that is that it makes it where programs are almost incentivized to cut guys up to 7 because they know they can replace them with other guys. It's a terrible development, but that's kind of where we've painted ourselves into that corner. So I'd be surprised if on the Auburn front you didn't see at least that number rise to 7 before it came time to put together this entire roster for next year.
Yeah, as a guy that covers high schools predominantly, I hate that because these
Yep.
guys work to get those scholarships, and it's happening all over. It's not just Auburn. Obviously, we saw a couple of guys this week from Alabama in the portal as well. So, going to be a lot of changes. Randy, let's look back at the Iron Bowl. We know with outcome, we don't want to dive into the outcome and all that stuff. But as far as a recruiting base, now Alabama didn't really. I mean, they won the game. Obviously, probably not going to affect their recruiting either way because they're already, the number one class or certainly among the number one top classes in the nation. How do you feel like the way this game went, the closeness of it, Auburn having a chance to win there, do you think that could have a positive effect on their recruiting?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt about it. When you look at the list of guys who were at the Iron Bowl, it's basically the who's who of recruits in Alabama, whether it's this class of 2022 or 23 or 24 even, all those guys. And some people on the Auburn side might say, well, they're just coming to see their favorite team, Alabama, play. Even if that's true, those guys are still getting the full Auburn experience. So I think from that perspective, yes, I don't think anything happened that would diminish those guys liking Alabama, but I certainly think it puts Auburn on the table for a lot of those guys, even if their motivation was, hey, let me go see the Crimson Tide play. I think there was a lot of positive vibe coming out of that game. And the final result of the game in terms of the score will be forgotten long before those guys forget about just the overall experience and what a great day it was and the fan involvement and all those sorts of things. So I think it was a huge day for Auburn and certainly not a detriment for Alabama at all.
Yeah, we had Keith Niebuhr on last week. Simone and I did from 247 Sports, and that's what he said. He said, look, as long as they don't get blown out and it's just, everybody leaves at halftime, you can expect it to have a good impact. So we'll see. Obviously, coming forward, signing day, December 15th, not that far away. One guy who was there, and Randy, it looks like an Iron Bowl battle possibly for this guy, Curtis Perry from Pike Road, the defensive lineman. I think most people think he's going to end up at Alabama. He comes out this week and says maybe Auburn's his leader, and maybe he ends up somewhere else. But this is the top uncommitted guy in our state, top uncommitted senior in our state. He'll be playing in the Super 7. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. What's your impressions of him? You've seen him twice, by the way. What's your impression of him, and where do you think he ends up? Here's some Patrick throwing up some highlights for us.
Disruptive player. I've seen him play twice this year. I saw him play last year when he was at Park Crossing. Interesting, I saw him in the playoffs in Mobile against Faith Academy. It was the eve of him beginning his official visit to Alabama, and he was wearing an Auburn towel during that game. I thought that was interesting. I talked to him after the game about his recruiting a little bit, said he was really looking forward to going to Alabama the next day for the weekend for his official visit. But he was in Auburn for Iron Bowl week. That was his official visit to Auburn. Said he really loved the atmosphere and all that. You always want to talk to guys immediately after their visits, but then maybe a week or two after that as well to kind of say, okay, now that high of the visit has worn off a little bit, what are you really thinking about where you end up? But Ben, he's a disruptive force. I've never seen a player more quick twitch in terms of getting off the line of scrimmage as a defensive lineman. He's just amazing how quick he gets off on the defensive front. And, in high school, as people go to the Super 7, they'll see he's playing a lot of offense now too, just as a H-back kind of fullback guy, just demolishing people on the defense. So he's a great player, great prospect. And this really is one of the few guys that we're seeing a true Iron Bowl battle for Curtis Perry.
Do you think that's what it boils down to? I mean, do you think anybody else gets in there? Or do you think it's Alabama or Auburn?
No, I think it's Alabama or Auburn. I'd be surprised if he ends up out of state.
And I think, it seems like signing day is coming up. It is. But for this guy, we've had him on the show. I mean, I think it could go down to signing day. I mean, he's going to have a lot of suitors, and I think we'll see where he ends up. But we'll be following that for sure. Curtis Perry. The other guys I'm interested a lot. I think they had like 100 visitors down there, but two guys we're particularly interested in, Randy, from our neck of the woods, Shemar James from Faith Academy, former Florida commit, and Robert Woodyard from Williamson, still current Alabama commit. What do you think those guys, where's your best guess those guys end up?
It's interesting with Shemar James because he's been really hard to follow. He had a chance to be at that Iron Bowl, and he was probably the only guy in this current class who was not there and decided instead to go watch Florida play Florida State, despite the fact that Florida, the team that he was previously committed to, didn't have a head coach at the time. Dan Mullen had already been fired, and Billy Napier had not yet come in, and yet he chose to go to that game with Florida and Florida State. So I still think he's all over the place a little bit. I could see him ending up at Auburn. I could see him at Alabama, but I could definitely see him ending up at Florida too. I think that one's just really up in the air with him. Robert Woodyard, look, I think you and I are both in agreement. He's a great player, Ben. Been committed to Alabama for a long time, a true linebacker, could play the middle, but also athletic enough to do some other things. Been committed to Alabama the whole time, but we've been hearing all these rumors about his connection to Auburn and that he's ultimately going to end up at Auburn. As of today, still committed to Alabama, but I don't think the visit for the Iron Bowl did anything to hurt Auburn's chances to try to flip him.
Yeah, I mean, he's not a guy that's on social media a lot. You know, his defensive coordinator is Antonio Coleman, a former Auburn star. Not that I don't think that necessarily plays anything into it, but I still think he may end up at Auburn. Shemar James, I'm like you, Randy. I don't have a guess. I mean, I'd be kind of surprised if he goes back to Florida at this point. I still think it's Alabama or Georgia. I don't really think Auburn's in it too much with him, but we'll see. We had him on our radio show, and we'll see where it goes from there. So. Interesting. A lot of news still to be decided before signing day, and those three guys are certainly in the mix. Also, before we get to Super 7, Randy, a lot of coaching news in the last couple of days. Head coaches going everywhere. Lincoln Riley to USC, Brian Kelly to LSU. Just craziness. How does this play into recruiting as we get close to 3 weeks from signing day?
Well, I think it's appropriate that you bring it up on a recruiting show because it's all about recruiting, Ben. The reason why Lincoln Riley is today the coach at USC is because of the early signing period. If he'd have stuck around for 3 more weeks, he would have signed all those great players to Oklahoma and then not gotten to coach them at USC. And so that's why this change is being made. Don't make any bones about it. The reason why the timeliness of this is happening is all about the early signing period, and it's really a disgrace. I mean, it's terrible on all fronts. It's bad for kids. It's bad for coaches. It's bad for college fans. Imagine this. Brian Kelly is going to LSU. They've still got a pretty good chance of being in the college football playoff. Ben.
That's crazy to me. I mean, that's
and
crazy.
It's also, if you listen to some people in the know saying that the most logical next Notre Dame coach is Luke Fickell, there's a good chance he could be in the playoff with Cincinnati playing against Notre Dame. So which team's he going to coach? And it's all because of the early signing period. That's why we're doing it now. These guys might still end up at these places. Like Lincoln Riley might go to USC and Brian Kelly might still go to LSU, but it would have been after the fact. It would have just been in time that they had their new job before the February signing period. So if it happened on, January 10th, that would have been fine. They would have had lots of time to still put together their signing classes. But because of this early signing period, coaches are getting fired midseason. Coaches are taking new jobs, even when their team still has a chance to play for the national championship. What are we doing?
Yeah, and we talked about the portal. I mean, you got all these different guys from different schools going into the portal. So, not only we're talking about high school recruiting, we're talking about colleges recruiting other college.
And again, why the guys are going into the portal like Pierce Quick at Alabama, and it could still be a good player at Alabama. Why is he already in the portal when Alabama's in the week of preparation for the SEC championship game? It's because of the early signing period. Because teams are trying to get their rosters together to see how many high school guys do I need to sign or who's going to be in the portal. Well, Pierce Quick gets his name out there, and suddenly more teams are going to have a spot for him than if they had just said, oh, man, we just signed 7 offensive linemen. We don't have a spot for you anymore.
It's a different world than, 3 years ago even, really. But, Pierce Quick, particularly the Alabama guy, his brother signed a baseball scholarship with Alabama. So really weird situation there. But anyway, well, it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks. Let's talk about the Super 7, Randy, starting this week, Wednesday night at Birmingham's Protective Stadium, new venue. I'm excited about getting up there and seeing that. Games Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And we want to break down, the top 5, the highest classes, the 5A, 6A, and 7A games. Let's start with the first one, the 7A game. 7 o'clock Wednesday night is when it's on. It's Thompson versus Central-Phenix City. We're going to look at some of the top recruits here, Randy, and there's a bunch of them. I mean, I don't know. We talked about it on our radio show. I don't know that there's been a game that I've covered with this many recruits on both sides.
Yeah, if you just want to act like you're a recruiting expert, just go to this game and watch the guys that you see there on the screen. Watch them for a play or two, and you'll certainly form an opinion that these guys are great players, and then you can be a recruiting expert. But it is on down the list. It's amazing, Ben, and you put those names up there of these great players, and you're not even mentioning the underclassmen, or, some of those guys are underclassmen, maybe the best players on the field, Peter Woods, Tony Mitchell, but certainly you start with Jeremiah Alexander. I think he is pretty clearly the unquestioned best player in the state of Alabama, committed to Alabama as a defensive end / outside linebacker. he's completely disrupted Ben, and he's been, I believe, the best player in the state of Alabama for going on 3 years now. He is just absolutely terrific. You're going to see him in a starring role against Central-Phenix City.
Yeah, and I was on the phone, Randy, with an opposing coach, doing a breakdown of the 7A championship game earlier this week that you can read on AL.com. And that coach who played Thompson twice told me that Peter Woods is the best player on the field anytime he's on the field. And those two guys, I don't know if they play the same position, but they're on the front line. I mean, you got to block one of them at least. There you see the highlights of it. How do you? We had Mark Freeman on our show, and I said, how do you block those guys? He said, you got to double team one and run away from the other, basically.
Yeah, that's easier said than done. I mean, just try running away from Jeremiah Alexander. I mean, that's a hard thing. And if you double team Peter Woods, that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to stay blocked. Just because you got two guys blocking him, those guys are absolutely dominant. Now, if anybody can have success, it's Central-Phenix City. They got a great team. I don't mean to say this is just going to be a coronation for Thompson, but man, there are a lot of great players on that Thompson sideline, but also a lot of great players from Central-Phenix City as well.
Yeah, I mean that list that we have up there, Randy. I mean that's nowhere near all the prospects that Thompson has. Certainly, Connor Harrell will play a big role, the quarterback who's committed to North Carolina, and Ryan Pepin's just recently flipped to Utah. Very good player, small but very electric player. There you can see the Central-Phenix City guys. Thanks for putting that up, Patrick. They got more players than that too. They got a lot of good players as well. Caleb Nix, I hadn't heard a lot of talk about him recruiting wise, but he's had a great year, a Mr. Football type season for his dad there. JQ Hardaway is a DB who's committed to Cincinnati. We all know Cincinnati, the type program they're having. And then I say their biggest two guys are these young guys, Carmelo English, a wide receiver, Tamarian Parker, defensive lineman. What stands out to you about that group or anybody else on the Central-Phenix City team, Randy?
Well, Parker stands out to me. He is absolutely a great defensive lineman, and it's just amazing when you think about that he's going to be in that class along with Peter Woods. 2023 is going to be the deepest class of recruits in Alabama I think I can ever remember in following recruiting. There's so many guys already on the radar for all the top programs, and Tamarian Parker is certainly one of those guys. And English as well is going to be a guy who ends up at one of the top 10 programs in the country. He's going to have every offer in the world as well. So big time guys in that 2023 class, and the two guys you've got mentioned right there from Central-Phenix City are a big part of that.
Yeah, I think John Garcia from Sports Illustrated, who knows these guys as well as anybody, told us recently that if Curtis Perry wasn't the top pass rusher right now in the state, it was this guy, Tamarian Parker, who's just been a disruptive force there for Central-Phenix City. So should be a great one. 7 p.m. Wednesday is the 7A championship game. On Thursday night, the 5A championship game is Pleasant Grove and Pike Road. A couple of guys for Pleasant Grove that we have. DeMarcus Lacey, a running back. He has not committed anywhere. I'm not sure what the interest is in him, but he's had a great year for them. Inez Cooper, a big offensive lineman. That's kind of the Pleasant Grove guys. And then, of course, on the Pike Road side, we mentioned we talked at length about Curtis Perry, the top uncommitted guy in the state. You also got Quinshon Junkins, the running back who committed to Ole Miss on our show here a month or so back. And then I know, Randy, you like, Vyson Lang, big offensive lineman, junior, but you really like Iverson Hooks, quarterback, athlete for Pike Road.
We've got so many of these guys in state this year, Ben, that are quarterbacks in high school that you wonder if they're quarterbacks at the next level. I'm not sure about Iverson Hooks. I just know he's a great athlete. He's a great baseball player. I've seen him play baseball a little bit. Just so dynamic as a quarterback. He's so fun to watch when they put him in the shotgun formation and just say, run around and make plays. It is so much fun to watch him do that. But Inez Cooper is somebody to watch, Ben. I really think there's a great chance he ends up in Auburn's class coming up. So if you're going to the Super 7 to watch Pleasant Grove, watch for Inez Cooper, a really, really huge offensive lineman. Going to be interesting to see him line up against Curtis Perry. I think Cooper could earn himself a spot in the Auburn class with a good performance against, one of the best pass rushers in the country.
I really think this is a good matchup. Good recruits, but also Pleasant Grove's been there 3 years in a row. Pike Road, first time, young program, first time they've ever been there. Obviously, people want to see Curtis Perry and what he does. Quinshon Junkins. They also have a freshman running back named Anthony Rogers, who's really good, a really young guy for Patrick Browning's team. So that's the game, 7 p.m. Thursday. And then our last game that we want to talk about, the Class 6A championship game. Randy, this is usually the most competitive game of the Super 7. It looks like it could be again this year. It's Clay Chalkville against Hueytown, 7 p.m. on Friday to really wrap up the Super 7. A lot of guys on these two teams as well for Clay Chalkville, Caleb Johnson, the quarterbacks, a Louisville commit. Marquarius Squirrel White is what we like to call him, Randy Squirrel, going to Tennessee. And a guy that I haven't seen get a lot of publicity, but really a good player, Ed Osley, the running back, has been pivotal for them during their undefeated run. And then for Hueytown, you've seen them a couple of weeks ago, Randy. Earl Woods is only a junior, electric quarterback for them, Mr. Football candidate, and DeAndre Coleman. I know you like him, Randy, big-time wide receiver who's committed to Coastal Carolina.
Yeah, Earl Woods is another one of those guys like Iverson Hooks where you look at him and say, is he big enough to be a quarterback on the big-time level? I don't know. I just know he is super dynamic running that really fast offense for Hueytown. And DeAndre Coleman, I love when this happens, Ben. I did go see them play. Didn't really know anything about him at all and committed to Coastal Carolina, which is a good program, but it's a group of 5 school. And then I watched DeAndre Coleman, and I think, how is this guy not considered a 5-star prospect? He is outstanding, really hard to cover, and they get him the ball deep. If you just try to, play against their run, they're just going to run him 50 yards down the field and tell Earl Woods to sling it down there, and he's going to make most of one-on-one catches. He is really fun to watch and committed to Coastal Carolina. Maybe he ends up signing there, and if he does, then they are getting a steal because he is a great prospect.
So good matchups. Obviously, those are the night matchups, but 7 games, 3 each day on Thursday and Friday, 1 on Wednesday. Go to the Super 7 if you can. It's at Birmingham's Protective Stadium. If you can't go, check out all our coverage here on AL.com. We'll have live updates and stories and recruiting features, columns, and all that stuff beginning Wednesday. Shout out again to Simone Eli, our normal co-host, as she gets ready to have a child this week. I'm hoping everything goes well there. I'm sure it will for her and Coach Sessions. She'll be back with us some point soon, I hope. But in the meantime, Randy and I will be with you. We'll be back normal time next week, I hope, noon on Wednesday to review the Super 7 and talk about any crazy recruiting news going on. Randy, tell us where people can hear you before they hear this show again.
Yeah, I'm on Sports Talk 99.5 in Mobile, but the easiest way to get it is if you just go to the iHeartRadio app. It's free. Just go there and type in Sports Talk 99.5 or type in my name, Randy Kennedy, and we're on every afternoon, including the show that Ben and I do, Inside High School Sports, which is live every Wednesday at 2:00. So check that out if you get a chance. We do a lot of recruiting all during the week, but particularly on that Wednesday show, we do try to hit that heart.
A lot to talk about, and it'll just increase in the next few weeks. Join us. Thank you again for our sponsor, Southern Orthopedic Surgeons, here for the athlete and all of us. We'll be back next week. Enjoy the Super 7.